Hey everybody, and welcome to the 51st episode of the epic linear Song of Ice and Fire reread from Vassals of Kingsgrave, an offshoot of a podcast of Ice and Fire. This episode could potentially spoil any events in George R.R. Martin's published works, including the TWOW preview chapters. It will, however, not contain show spoilers for Game of Thrones. My name's Bina007, I'm going to be your host today, and joining me we have Duncan.
G'day, this is Duncan, also known as Valkyrist on the forums.
Fellow Kraken Sarah.
Sarah Lady Weaver on the forums.
We have Casey.
Hi, this is Casey, Blue-Eyed Queen on the forums.
And for the first time ever on a proper computer, not an iPhone with a Bloody Mary in hand, it's Varley.
Hey, what's up? Matt in real life.
So today we're going to be covering the events of December 17th to the 18th, 299, directly after the Red Wedding episode, which was, I think, fairly traumatic. If you guys haven't heard it, you should definitely check out that episode. Katie, aka Lady Griffin, gives the most hilarious "This is how I experienced the Red Wedding for the first time" story. But today, that was on December 15th, 299. Today we pick up the action with Sam 3 on December 17th. We go back 6 chapters and 70 pages in my version of the published order. And it's actually interesting to note that this wall-based episode of narrative is interwoven with the 3 wedding chapters that we did last week. So George has basically very skillfully interlaced the 2 big action set pieces of the wildling attack on the wall and the Red Wedding. So it's really fascinating to see it. But anyway, this week we're concentrating on Sam 3, John 6 and John 7. And starting off with a summary of Sam 3 is Varley.
Hey, so this is a really short chapter. It basically deals with Sam being an inept little, can I say, bitch, only being overdone by his asshole father, and then the whites come and Cold Hand saves them. So he thinks it starts off he's in White Tree, and he looks at the face, and he doesn't know if it's the same face, or do we know if the faces actually do change?
On the werewolves?
Yeah.
Not sure.
Because this one's crying. So that was one question I had. How long had they been walking? Because the second horse died 3 days out from Craster's Keep, but they don't say how long ago that was.
Okay, I can look that up on the linear timeline while you continue. I'll try and figure that out.
Okay. To show Sam's ineptness, like, he can't make a fire, which seems like one of those skills that you probably want to learn, prior to going north of the wall. He tries fishing, which doesn't make any fucking sense if they're trying to escape quickly to sit down. You have to sit there and fishing is time consuming. You're not just going to throw some bait in the water and.
Maybe he meant with his hands or with a spear or something. I don't know. I don't think he has a fishing rod.
Oh, no, but I mean, even with a spear, you have to stand there and wait for a fish to come.
Yeah, and there's no guarantee with it being, I can't say the start of winter or snowing, but with it being so cold and icy, the fish probably aren't around that much either, because don't a lot of fish go into a sort of hibernation mode when ice freezes over in ponds and stuff?
Well, it depends on the depth of the pond, but typically, if it has they'll go to the deepest parts, and that's why you could go ice fishing. But you have to drill through the ice and get to, because ice is actually a really good insulator against the cold once it gets thick enough. So, but that being said, they keep on bitching about how cold it is. But then he also says, why aren't there any ferries or bridges to bring us across the water? Shouldn't it all be ice?
Yeah, he mentions about having to break the top of the stream so the horse can drink from it. So that's why, Sam. That's why.
Yeah. He complains about having to go around streams and lakes, and he freaking hates them and everything else, and then all of a sudden it's dude, just walk across them.
Or maybe it's not thick enough to walk across for a horse to support a horse. It might be only a thin layer of ice.
And to support Sam, let's not lie here, but he's probably not super light, especially not with all of his furs and a sword.
Yeah, but my point is that he says how cold it is, and if it's that cold for that long of a time, it'll be thick enough.
Sam's been up there for a year now, right? Since he left Hornhill, I think. Is that correct?
Bina's looking at the timeline, so she might be able to.
It's 9 days that they've been walking since Craster's Keep, so I will now look up when Sam left Hornhill.
Sorry, Bina. I think it's been about a year, but either way, he's lived most of his life in the South, and not only the South where he was potentially going to be a lord figure. Even like, I mean, the whole situation with his father is terrible in general, but he didn't know that he was going to live this life up in the north, and he is not prepared for survival skills because he never thought he would need them. Even at the wall, they gave him the maester job where he wasn't expected to necessarily fight or anything of that sort. I don't give him a pass. I think that he needs to give more credit to Gilly for basically keeping them alive, but he's very not used to this at all.
Okay, so he got to the wall last September, so he's been, and this is now December of the following year, so assume it takes him a couple of months to get there from Hornell. So maybe a year and a half he's left home?
Yeah, it's no secret he's not a natural survivalist. He couldn't. He says himself he couldn't catch deer in a forest teeming with deer. He's not going to
with huntsmen and dogs.
Fish, yeah, in like this barren wasteland that is beyond the wall. But I don't know. I respect him for trying. He keeps calling himself a coward, but he's still trying to protect this woman and this young girl.
He does
when
the
he could
right
have just
thing,
run for his
doesn't
life.
He's got such mental, ethical, innate goodness and kind of a sort of courage that goes with that, to not overlook things, not make the easy choices. Oh, well, we're in an uneasy alliance with Cresta. I mean, he's useless in some ways, but in other ways, he's actually got so much moral fiber. And there's not many people in Westeros who have that, so I like that.
It's heartening to think that for every character that plots carnage and exploitation, there's another character like Sam, for all his ineptness, that is hell-bent on just impulsively doing good. You know, even with a father as terrible as Randall, he just instinctually wants to help people who are downtrodden.
Yeah.
Like he was helped, I guess, when he was at the wall by Jon.
It's very heartwarming, really, to have him be there, to be sort of that positive moral compass for something you can strive towards or hope that the other characters head towards, hopefully. With Sam, I thought it was kind of funny that he had his horse die, but it doesn't sound like he can't hunt for shit, as we found out. But it doesn't seem like they even like butchered up his horse and took some of the meat with them. You don't have to hunt. It's free meat. Just take it with you.
He probably doesn't know how to process an animal like that.
Maybe Gilly does.
I'm sure Gilly did, but she's probably in the middle of breastfeeding, and he's trying to mansplain butchery to her, and it's just the whole thing.
I don't know. Does he mansplain much? Because I don't think he really does mansplain much. I think he's more of a, you know your thing, I know my thing.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. He probably is very cognizant of what he doesn't know. And he kind of demonstrates it throughout this whole chapter of everything he can't do.
Yeah, it seems especially in this chapter, like you see a lot of Sam's thoughts, and he's like, oh, I can't do this. Oh, I can't do that. I can't do anything. What's wrong with me? They're calling me Sam the Slayer, and I'm not Sam the Slayer. And you can just see all of his doubts of himself, and they're particularly stemmed to his father's treatment of him, which is very sad. And he's starting to, find his own, especially with the Sam the Slayer moment, but he still has those thoughts with him.
I completely agree, Casey. And I think one of the real themes of this chapter and the Jon chapters that we've both read and are going to read in this episode are these kind of conflicts about identity. And is he really Sam the Slayer? Is he brave? Is he really a man of the Night's Watch? Still sort of thinks of himself as a Tarly in his dying moments.
Right.
He thinks, I can't really marry Gilly because a Tarly can't marry a wildling girl. And it's amazing how Jon also has been having these conflicts of, am I a Stark? Am I a bastard? Am I a man of the Night's Watch? So I like that kind of the layering of that theme.
And I think that kind of goes with this, the kind of tone of this whole chapter. It kind of goes from an Eeyore kind of Sam-centric, him trying to figure out he's stuck in the situation, what he can do, what he can't do, to this great George R. R. Martin kind of horror when the whites come in the long room, and then to the high fantasy of this dude riding in on an elk to save him. And I just kind of love the way that it should, what I just said shouldn't have sounded like it could work in a chapter, but it does.
Yeah, I think you really feel the danger of the world when you're looking through the eyes of a character like Sam. Maybe a character like Jon, who's very militant and self-assured, could get through this, but Sam is he thinks of himself, he has such a negative opinion of himself, and he's so clumsy and all that everything just feels impossible to him. But I don't know, he keeps trying, he keeps going. One of the things I liked about this chapter was he and Gilly seem to sort of bond over the way that their fathers have mistreated them. And it's almost like they're creating creating this little home in the middle of the woods, because they've got he says like a prayer, and they've got the little fire going, and they're huddling around the kid in this little cottage. So even though they're surrounded in the middle of this swirling chaos and violence, they're trying to etch out some kind of piece of safety and family, this makeshift family, and this idea that even though they had horrible upbringings, they don't want this kid to have the same. So they want to try and make a better life for this kid. At least that's kind of what I got from it.
Isn't that also what a lot of parents feel like for their kids, that they want their kids to have a better life as well? Like, just in general, not in George R.R. Martin's work, because that's not the case. But like, as a parent, Matt, do you feel like that's the same?
Excuse me?
Wait, you're not
Do you
a
know
parent?
something I don't?
Damn it! Is no one a parent here? God damn it!
Oh my god. I don't
That
think
was
anybody
a
here is a
legend.
parent.
Just
So, I would think that for the most part, what you just said is true, that of course you'd want your progeny to have it better than you did. Some people are just resigned to be like, listen, you're a tanner's son, you're going to be a tanner. Like, that's it. Like, I think they're just resigned to like their lot in life, because it is such a stratified society that you can't be like, oh, I'm a blacksmith, I'll just become a lord, unless you're Gendry.
well, I
Yeah,
didn't
but-
mean like social change, more just emotional support, that kind of thing, like creating a loving home, because they know how much it can mess you up when you're not loved by your
Yeah,
parents.
I agree. There's something of a make-believe, when he's spreading his cloak over the three of them to go to sleep. It's like it's a little family, a little respite from this cruel world. I just think he's so tragic, isn't he? Like, he seems, mind you, we don't get the Gilly internal monologue. He seems so deeply, I don't know, almost like guilt-ridden about the relationship with the dad. Like, his dying thought when he thinks he's going to die is, "I'm really sorry I let you down, Dad." The whole thing is
Well,
awful.
But he also says, like, he could go back to Horn Hill and be like, I killed one of the others. I'm Sam the Slayer. And then, like, just seeing his dad disapprovingly scowl at him.
Yes, I love that line. Even in his fancy, Lord Randall only scowled.
Yeah. So he puts the cloak around him and he has this nice little moment. But then, do we think this is a prophetic dream somehow of like the dead brothers that will be all together later on? Like, is this like a prophecy of everyone who's going to die? Or is this just a weird pseudo-sexual, like, fever dream kind of thing?
I thought it was a pretty happy dream, because I mean, it's set in Horn Hill, so it's this dream of home, this respite from his current state. But rather than being surrounded by his family, he's surrounded by his Night's Watch brothers. So it's almost like he's created this new family, and that's the kind of thing he's pining for in this moment. And it's almost, you see a bit of a reflection of it with John in the next chapter, where he dreams of being in Winterfell again, but it's with Ygritte, which is kind of like this new familial bond he's created. But it's much darker dream in that case, because she's bleeding.
Yeah, it seems like in the dream, there's something that happened where they're all reverted back to their family colors, because it says like they sat around the table, and instead of wearing black, they're all colorful. But like everyone that he lists, I think, has died, or as of the last book is dead, or is unaccounted for.
Okay, guess it's not that happy.
Except Gilly, right?
What's that?
Except Gilly.
Except for Gilly, but by the time they get down to Old Town, isn't she done breastfeeding?
I don't remember.
What is that?
Has anyone breastfed before?
She's
Who's a
basically
parent?
dead now.
I did want to say that I think Katie mentioned in the last reread that George spends a weird amount of time on Dany's nipples, and I thought that George also spent a weird amount of time on Gilly's nipples in this chapter.
Yeah.
I had a bit of a crackpot theory before we move on to the rest of the chapter with the song, and particularly the Seven. I think it may have been mentioned earlier on one of the reread podcasts, but the theory is basically that the seven Starks represent the Seven, basically.
Yeah.
And that's really weird, because they're the old gods, not the new.
Well, Catelyn. But I think it's quite forced,
yeah.
isn't it? I mean, do you guys actually give that credence?
Is Catelyn the mother or the stranger, or is Arya the stranger, or
I actually thought that Arya might be the smith because it says in the song, put the world of men to right. Sounding like maybe like putting everybody in their rightful place type thing, like from right
The
and
grave?
wrong. Yeah. And maybe potentially either John or Rickon being the stranger, which, because I know that people have a lot of theories about Rickon being very dark eventually, but I don't know if he'll actually reappear, and maybe they'll just throw John in there instead. But no, I mean, like, Ned's the father, Kat's the mother, the warrior is Robb, the crone is Bran, Smith debatable, but I think it's Arya, and the maiden Sansa.
So we only have 4 out of the 7 alive, though. Does that mean we've killed the gods that like bring justice into the world and fight for what's right?
It would fit in with a nihilistic tone at present, wouldn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder if Rickon, I mean, I know that a lot of us hope for a great northern conspiracy and that Rickon will come back at some point or will go to Skargos, but I just wonder if he's a bit like Benjen, that he's gone off and we just might not see him. He's gone a bit feral and that'll be the end of that. I quite like it as an idea. I think it's quite brave and I would support that.
Well, that's the whole Shaggy Dog theory, right? Where it's just a storyline that leads to nowhere. And
yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, every time I read Rickon, like in the earlier chapters, it just seems like everybody's like, oh, Rickon's gonna do this or do that, and I'm like, Rickon seems very feral and like not human anymore through like the actions of Shaggy Dog, and I don't know if we're ever gonna see him again.
Exactly,
I
because
really want
George.
to go to Skagos.
Me too. But
there's like so much teasing of it. Like there's so many lines about, only the heart trees know half of what goes on Skagos. It's like, oh my god, what is happening there? It's gonna be nuts.
Do you think we could actually see it through Bran's eyes, or do you think we'll see it through Davos's? I mean, we have to see it, right? Because Davos.
It's got to be Davos. Yeah, it's got to be. If he just gets lost and winds up back on the Sister Isles, I will be outraged.
He's going to end up on a rock again, and then this time no one's going to save him.
And Gendry's going to row past him in a rowboat.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't know. So do we have thoughts about the song that Sam sings? This very sort of beautiful lullaby about how all the gods want to protect the children, which I thought was deeply ironic in a world that brutalizes children as far as we can tell. Yeah, exactly.
I thought it was interesting, and I think you see this in a few of the different songs that we get, is you kind of get the cultural values of the society kind of instilled in children from a very young age. So you have a song like Bear and the Maiden Fair, it has this really weird rationalization of, like rape culture and all that, men can't control themselves around beautiful women. And here you almost get like this interesting gendering of the different figures, like the father is this purveyor of justice and knowledge, and the mother is this maternal gentility. And the other interesting thing I thought was that the gods are all sort of tied to tools. So the crone has the lamp, the warrior has the sword, the smith has the hammer. So the idea of bringing tools into religious mythos, it's a bit of a separation or a continuation of the more natural kind of pagan religion, where it's connected to nature that you see with the old gods. So that's interesting.
So maybe I'm confusing this with Jonathan Pryce or the books, but don't they say it's just 7 aspects of one god, like the trilogy of like the Catholic or the Christian god?
Yeah, I think it's Septon Marable talks about that, and the smith could easily be the cobbler or something like that. That was just the way it was written down in the 7-pointed star. But they don't really explain how that works, because they seem to be very specific aspects of like human occupation and the way the world's constructed. So yeah.
So there's a line in here. So are we ready to go to where the whites come in, or?
Yeah, do it.
So there's a line in here that said that Sam's trying to, fend off Small Paul with some dragon glass. And he said he clutched the dagger with both hands to hold it steady. The white did not seem to fear the dragon glass. Perhaps he did not know what it was. So does that mean, because... Okay, so he stabs Small Paul with a dragon glass, but we're assuming that the armor deflected it completely, and that's why it didn't kill him, and that the fire actually killed it.
Yeah, it shatters on the armor.
Okay, so is that just Small Paul still being an idiot and not fearing the thing that could kill him, or does dragon glass just not kill whites?
Yeah, it's not clear. I assume that Dragonglass kills White Walkers and fire kills Whites, because the White is still essentially just like a human body, so it'd just be like a knife stabbing it. There's nothing necessarily magical about it.
Well, it seemed like
So-
later when the ravens attacked them, they were attacking the eyes, like trying to like if you get the blue out of the eyes, that means like the spell is broken or whatever.
Yeah.
There was actually an interesting part in this one when Paul died. They talked about how the blue left his eyes, like it melted away,
Yeah.
and then that's when Sam left the building.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. It implies like a different kind of zombie, because I guess we were sort of thinking about the zombie as this sort of George A. Romero zombie, where they're just this horde of mindless dead things. But that implies like the older sort of undead slaves, like there's some being controlling them from afar, like puppets on a string. And that once you break the connection by burning it, you break the blue eyes, then the strings are broken.
Sorry, do you think it's almost like melting the eyes because it's blue, so that could be symbolic of being ice? So if you melt it, which is why it has to be fire, and then that's why it dies? Or...
But how did they kill the Whites? Because obviously John burnt one up with fire when they attacked the Castle Black, when those two guys came back alive. How'd they kill the other one?
Fire, no?
I don't
Shocking
recall.
lack of knowledge.
I think it's all
assume
fire.
Yeah. Well, no, he wasn't. He didn't come back to life yet, did he? They just kind of burned him. Like once they realized that one of them woke up, they burned both of them.
No, the other guy killed the other sir on the wall. Like he took his head off or something.
Huh.
Sorry, was this one in the first book or the second book? Because I can try to find it
First.
for you. First, cool.
Yeah, it's when Benjen first goes missing, and they're saying the words, and Ghost finds the guy's hand, and they drag the two bodies back, and one gets up and tries to kill Lord Commander, and John saves him, and that's how he gets Longclaw, and then the second one kills the knight, but I'm not sure like if they chopped his head off or what, because they chopped off his other hand and it was still moving, and they sent it in a jar down the King's Landing.
So do you all have like good cold hands theories? Who do you think he is? I mean, there's lots of candidates, right? Benjen, Bloodraven,
Well,
one of the Raven's Teeth, the
doesn't-
Waymorhois, the Night's King. I mean, does it matter? Does it have to be someone? Is that just the fans being over intellectualizing things?
it seems like Benjen's been ruled out, because I think Martin has specifically said it's not Benjen. And also I think it's book 5, the Children of the Forest, or the Child of the Forest Leaf, says that he died long ago, whereas Benjen only went missing like 2 years ago, so it's probably not him. But I have a theory, but do you guys have any?
Go for it.
No, you go.
Well, I don't think he's a named character or a historical character necessarily, but I think he might be Skegosi. I think there's a theory about this on Reddit, but I thought of it independent of that, so I'm still claiming it. But there's a line at the very end of it where Sam notices that his hands are cold as stone, and the Skegosi are called the Stoneborn. Also, the Skegosi are brought up in like the next chapter, in the John chapter. So there's sort of this bringing up of this group of people. I don't think it's the first time, but that was also another little connection I thought of. In book 5, it's implied that Cold Hands tracks down the last of the mutineers, and he kills them and feeds them to Bran and co. And he says it's pig, but that would be highly unlikely that there'll be pigs wandering the haunted forest. And when Bran goes there in sorry, I'm forgetting everyone's name. In Summer's skin, he can't smell any pig, so it's suggested that it was the mutineers, and cannibalism is practiced on Skagos. And there's the giant elk, and like unicorns are famous on Skagos, but there's also a reference to shaggy great horned beasts, so it could be the elk. And the other thing I thought of was the Skagosi Rebellion, which occurred I think 100 years before the setting of the novels. And Bloodraven and Maester Aemon was sent to the wall about 70 years ago. So I was thinking, because the Skagosi Rebellion was defeated, that there might be a bunch of Skagosi that was sent to the Night's Watch. So maybe one of them became Bloodraven's like second in command, or his first ranger or something like that. So they died together, and he's like second in command doing.
So do you think that like Cold Hands? Because at one point he says, "You're a monster, Bran Stark." Do you think that it's possible that that's his like great uncle? Because right after the rebellion, doesn't the Starks marry into the Skagosi?
I don't recall reading that, but it's possible.
Do my research for me.
No, you can Google that one. Just Google it.
Okay, I'm Googling it. I'm doing the research here.
No, but with your Skagossi theory, it kind of. I didn't have a theory on who exactly it was, but I had a theory that it would be someone with a blood trait. So whether it's a family, someone from a family who has wargs or green seers, or like a Targaryen with their dragon rider magic, something like that, or like being a wrote in the doc the Night's King as well, because they have that magical link as well.
I'd like to think it. Or go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I don't think it'd be the Night's King just because I assume he was burned. Like, once he was dethroned, he would have been eradicated. It's described as him being eradicated from history. So I assumed he was burned along with the other whites, but I don't know, possible.
I think the reason that we think that Benjen is discredited or is definitely not it because of what George said is it comes from a draft that he wrote. And then like one of the editors was like, "Is this Benjen?" And he was like, "No," in all caps. So it's just on a piece of paper. So I'm still kind of like, that might not be real. That I'm sure, like, I think it's real enough for the fandom to.
But also he can change his mind, can't he? I mean, when the first book came out 20 years ago, the draft before then, his entire universe of characters and plot lines has expanded beyond measure, and maybe he will find it useful to use Cold Hands and Benjen in that way. I mean, I don't think we should hold him to what he believed back then, and I'm sure his views on characters has also been changed by the show. So yeah, I hold out some hope. But in a way, I do quite like the idea of some things being left unresolved and Benjen just being lost to the snow, being lost to the north.
Do you think that's likely though? Because I mean, Benjen was like, I mean, I guess Bannon got attacked by whites, and he was supposed to be really good, but Tywin's still there, the guy with the wooden teeth that can smell the cold coming or whatever. Like, he was first ranger. He knew his shit. Like, do you think the elements just got him, or
I don't know, but going back to Duncan's theory, I think it's interesting that I didn't know about that theory until now, and I noted in my notes, especially with the John chapters, that the Skagossi come up a lot, and I thought it was strange because I didn't really remember that when I first read it. So I think that there's a lot more connections to Skagos than we might think there are, but that's just me thinking off the cuff right now.
Another question is, why is Cold Hands sentient? Why isn't he like sort of mindless zombie like the other whites? Is he controlled by the three-eyed raven, or?
Well, he has to be. Right?
That's what supports the idea that he's one of the raven's teeth. That he's someone through whom Bloodraven acts, and Bloodraven specifically wants to save Sam. That would be my preferred theory, I guess, for that reason.
On the Skagossi Reddit thread that I came across, someone suggested that he might have been like attacked and killed by a white. Or sorry, let me start again. That he was a warg that was attacked and killed by a white, and basically he jumped into the white's body after he died.
What? Wouldn't that be what Varamir is now? Because didn't he do that?
No, he jumped into a wolf.
No, he jumped into the chick's body that got attacked by whites.
And then
he was still alive.
But he couldn't hold it. He was pushed out again.
Yeah.
Because she was too strong.
Because he's a dickhead.
Varamir Sixskins? Come on.
It seems strange to me that Cold Hands would be described as dying long ago, because I didn't, even though they're undead, you would still assume they would rot like a regular corpse, that after, say, a couple of years, they would just be skeletons.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole thing that's also a theme of A Song of Ice and Fire is fire consumes and cold preserves, which is why I think Maester Aemon died immediately from leaving the wall.
And it could be like a cold magic that the White Walkers sort of wrap around their thralls.
Yeah. So I'm not finding anything saying that the Skagos married into Winterfell after the rebellion.
Yeah, you would think if the rebellion was crushed, they wouldn't necessarily need to create an alliance like that.
Well, hold on. The Skagossi house and the Flint house were married together as part of the peace deal. And this marriage eventually resulted in Eddard's grandmother being born. Boom!
Ooh.
I love how excited you guys are. That's so cute.
Very scandalous. I just had a couple of notes on just some of the language of the chapter. When Sam, with the Song of the Seven, the way he says that the stranger can't be spoken of, I thought it was cool how he wakes up in the middle of the night and there's just that stranger standing at the door, and the stranger is essentially death coming to wreak its vengeance. But also the Cold Hands kind of arrives as this kind of stranger figure to save them. So it's almost like he prayed to the gods, and this was the god that came to save them, death itself.
Yeah, well, he prays twice in this chapter. First, he prays in front of the weirwood, saying, "Old gods, like I said my vows, like my gods were the gods of the seven, but I said my vows in front of us. If you exist, please help." So then it's like, obviously the old god sent the ravens and cold hands, but then he sings this other song to the seven. So it's like, what power is at work here?
And when he steps out of the tent to see the horse being devoured, the raven says, "Fear, far, fee." He says, "Fair, far, fear." And it kind of reminded me of like the Jack and the Beanstalk, fee, fi, fo, fum, sort of portending this horror of childhood. So again, like working that sort of nursery rhyme out of the language.
It's interesting how the contrast between, or the comparison between both the two religions, and how it seems almost like Sam kind of like doesn't really know which one he identifies with yet. And I feel like, especially after this chapter, I feel like he will be more with the old gods, but still a theme for him, I think.
I agree. And again, that's part of that identity sort of crisis, isn't it? He's desperate and he will pray to whatever god he thinks might be at hand. And it's
but isn't that kind of like... Isn't that kind of cowardly too, though? Like, isn't that kind of like Stannis? It's like, oh shit, nothing's worked for me. Like, on to the next one. Like, I'll just, move on to one and one to one till one of them works for me. Like, doesn't that kind of suck?
I don't know. In this case, it feels like religion is more of an identity than like a crutch for Sam, anyways. Not to say that others use it in that way, but, I feel like for Sam, it feels like more of an identity crisis than oh my God, I need someone to help me. I need to pray to everybody.
Yeah, it doesn't feel cynical or opportunistic. He's not doing it out of... I mean, there is some level of calculation, but it doesn't feel like he's sort of an unbeliever who's just trying to sort of play the odds, or play the odds in some way. It feels like it's a genuine searching and striving for whatever might be real. So to that end, I give it a fairly wide berth.
Yeah, it comes from desperation.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the most humane points of the book. I mean, who among us in that situation wouldn't try everything possible just to survive? His feet are frostbitten. He's got a small baby in tow. They're starving. One of the horses is dead. I mean, it's an absolute desperate situation.
Just one last thing is that he mentions that when he's trying to fight off Small Paul, they punches him in the arms and then kicks him in between the legs uselessly. So you can't kick a white in the balls.
Good to know.
Good to know.
Okie dokie. Anything else on the chapter? It's a good one. It's a short one, but it's so rich in character and backstory and proper excitement at the end when Cold Hands rides in and saves them with the elk. It's pretty beautiful. And no one deserves it more than poor Sam.
And I love the Hitchcockian ravens kind of just exploding out of nowhere and filling the forest.
It's like something out of the birds, isn't it? It really is.
Very, very cool. And that was one of the scenes I loved in the show. Just the squawking of the ravens in the cold night air. So creepy.
And yet at this point, it's actually something good, which is really ironic.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so on the same day, December 17th, we go to John 6. We skip forward one chapter and a mere 10 pages in my edition of the books. And I believe it's Casey with a summary.
Yep. The chapter opens with John furiously trying to get back to the wall in Castle Black to his quote-unquote people, the Night's Watch. He daydreams of being back with his friends, many of whom are already dead unbeknownst to John. He also thinks of Ygritte and the guilt that surrounds his feelings of the relationship. He arrives in Moletown, where he gathers food and announces that the wildlings are beyond the wall and that they should all make for Castle Black. He gets back to a more desolate Castle Black and finds Donald Noy in the armory. He tells him the men are spread out against the wall, and John is aghast that they've fallen for Mance's feints and left Castle Black undefended, and with over 100 wildlings coming up from the south, a Queen's Crown. John learns that only a few people have made it back from beyond the wall, and that that Mormont has been killed by traitors in the Night's Watch. As Aemon and Noi work on Jon, he explains that the Free Folk have been looking for the Horn of Winter, but they do not have it. He mentions Ygritte and ends up confessing the relationship. He misses her and wishes he had never loved her, but also that he had never left her. After his quote-unquote Westerosi surgery, he wakes up and finds Pip and Gren. They explain who made it back from the Wall and how Sam became Sam the Slayer and the massacre at the Crasters. They said that Sam didn't make it back with them. Maester Aemon comes back up and tells Jon to chill out since they bound him up with moldy bread, and I find that horrific. And then he also hears even worse news of the state of Westeros and how Winterfell has fallen along with his two younger half-brothers, Bran and Rickon. Of course, at this point, the Wall does not know about the fate of Catelyn and Robb, but that has actually already happened. Jon falls back into a fever dream where he is swimming in the pools of Winterfell with Ygritte under a weirwood tree with his father's face. Ygritte tries to kiss Jon, but he couldn't with his father watching, and he thinks that he'll never father a bastard. Ygritte whispers, "You know nothing, Jon Snow." And as quoted from the book, her skin dissolved in the hot water and the flesh beneath sloughing off her bones until only skull and skeleton remained, and the pool bubbled thick and red.
Spooky.
Very foreshadowing.
Yeah. It's such a good dream.
Yeah.
I don't know. I only have one note on this chapter, and it's, we've been doing a lot of Sansa lately, and there is a partly justified criticism of her that she's very naive. But I also feel that Jon is a little bit when he rides back, and he wants to warn them of this threat from the south, and he's like, tell the king, he'll come and help us. Now, of course, at that point, he thinks there's only one. But he has a romantic ideal of what the Watch is and of what the king will do when he hears of their peril, and we know that's not the case, right? Because we've seen that poor chap go down South King's Landing with this animated hand, and it just shrivels and dies and no one cares. And I feel that romantic ideals are there for these Stark kids. The Watch is built on one, and the key romantic ideal that it's built on is that when you join the Watch, you lose your old identity. And Aemon is the guy who does that, right? He truly does give up his family. But for everyone else, that's not true. Like Jon and Sam, they wrestle with it. And at first I thought maybe it's because they're new and they still have to learn not to think like a Snow or a Stark or a Tarly. But the point is that we learn in this chapter that the old bear has had to keep two senior people from sort of warring in Westeros families or rival Westeros families in different castles at the opposite ends of the wall. So clearly it's a very conflicted, and there's a reality that's different from the romantic ideal, and yet Jon is still clinging to it. I don't know if I'm being a bit too harsh, but I just think it's interesting that there is a romance and a sad truth that is as similar as the one that we hear more about, which is you're no true knight, you have no honor.
But isn't that like the bait and switch that makes Stannis showing up at the Wall that much like awesome? Because it was like, yeah, because you just assume that it's like, okay, no one cares. And then I think even Jon says, he's like, dim-witted brother, he's like, oh, the king will come, like Robert will come with his warhammer, and he's like, all right, dummy. And then Stannis shows up and he's like, I don't know. I think I get what you're saying. Like there is this naive thing that keeps on getting crushed into us. Like, okay, we have this expectation, and then it gets crushed, and then like Stannis shows up at the Wall later, and it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. It does make it powerful because it's the one true honorable romantic act that is performed, the culmination of all this treacherous behavior. And for me, it's the redemption. Like there are so many characters that go through redemption in this book, including Jaime, but for me, Stannis, with all the nefarious sort of black magic-y stuff that he does, this is the making of him. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, I definitely think Jon's naive, but I also think he's just way out of the loop. He left at the very beginning of book 2. He doesn't know anything that's gone on in the War of the Five Kings. The extent to which everything's fallen apart. And when he said king, I actually thought he was referring to Robb. Like I thought he was saying, tell Winterfell, tell the king to come and save us. But maybe he was referring to the king in King's Landing. I guess the Watch has to remain neutral.
Okay. No, that's a good point, actually. I just naturally assumed he meant Joffrey, but maybe you're right.
But I think what's so great about the Stannis arrival is, yes, he's naive, but also that's the way things should be. And for once, trusting in goodness and law and order actually pays off. The king actually does what they're supposed to do. So he's definitely naive, but I think there's a bit of honor in naive, or a bit of, I don't know.
But that's my point, that naivety, I think people criticize the characters in these books as being naive for holding on to capital R romantic ideals. But there is something admirable in being an idealist and in having faith and having trust in these grand, noble ideas and pursuits. And when it does pay off, it makes my heart jump with warmth and joy that it's worked,
I think that's why I really latched on to characters like John and Sam after the Red Wedding, because it was such a shattering of everything we thought was good and right, and Rob was writing to make the right of the world and save the North, and it just such a violent reversal of fortune that it's like, please, Sam and John, don't die. So the urgency with which they ride to the wall is like, come on, you can do it.
You're just grasping for any sort of hope.
Anything to not let the world just slip into absolute oblivion. So, and there is like this sense of desperation in this chapter. He's just like beating his horse, riding as fast as he can. He doesn't even know where he's going. He's riding in circle. He's so mentally deteriorated. The wound on his leg is continually ripping open. The mare dying beneath him. The whole world seems to be falling apart, but he's just hell-bent on outriding the inevitable doom.
I think you're completely right. I think there is something that after the Red Wedding, the slightly maybe foolish in the real world idealists have a new attraction to us, because we need that something to cling on to, right?
I just wanted the good guys to have a win, and like this is what like the closest we get.
Well, no, we get the purple wedding, and then Sansa like escaping, and that's kind of like a high thing,
I guess.
But
but it's all duplicity and secrets and knives in the dark, and this is a clear threat.
With Sansa escaping, is it really a high note with where she's going to and whose company she'll be in and what they'll be using her for?
I mean, on the face of it, you're like, yes, she's escaping, awesome, and to like the situation that's just creepy and gross. But then you get teased with it again in this book with the freaking Viper in the Mountain fight. And it's like, good, this fucking disaster of a human being is going to finally get killed. And then,
Yep.
Yeah.
George, why do you do this to us, man? That's not cool.
Do you think that that's why so many people like Sam and Brienne, because they are clinging to something to be more positive? And Sam and Brienne are quite positive and naive in how they think and see the world almost through rose-coloured glasses a bit.
Yeah, they're not stupid, right? Sam's not stupid, Brienne's not stupid. And Brienne, she's not naive. I mean, she's gone through near rape. She's gone through a very brutal childhood, as brutal as Sam's. And I think both of them, if you're raised in an environment where you're bullied and teased and at personal physical risk, but don't become, as Arya does, dark and twisted, maintain somehow that inner light survives. And you act. I mean, they don't just believe it, they act on that faith. Brienne and Sam in their small ways cling to love and are open to it and act in a way that's good. It's just tremendously heartwarming. And in a sense, I know lots of fans love Tyrion, but Tyrion gets very dark by dance or within dance. And it feels to me like Brienne and Sam they're our pool of hope in these books.
Yeah. I think it depends on when you got into the fandom too, because if you got into the fandom real early, you had to like Sam and Bree, or you had to like just absolutely hate them, because instead of getting every character, you got Feast for Crows. And then you waited years for Dance of Dragons.
And I think it also, like, depending on who your favorite characters are and what storylines you like better, changes which one you like better, whether you like Dance better or Feast better.
Oh, for sure. And I think like people that love Tyrion were probably like, what the fuck, during the wait between A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons. And then you get this miserable, like, not clever, not like the Tyrion that we just left, like I don't know. It's a very weird twist, but yeah, I agree that after the Red Wedding, you do search for these characters that, are not going to be like complete psychotic murderers or, not necessarily like heroes, but just good people.
Yep.
I did think that this chapter was interestingly placed because it kind of gives you, the reader, like a bit of a recap of what's been going on in Westeros, because Jon's just discovering like the War of the Five Kings, that what's happened in Winterfell and what's going on, and it is actually before the Red Wedding chapter, so I think it kind of serves as like, here's what's going on before everybody dies. So I think it's probably placed correctly. It feels weird, like kind of reading all this after the Red Wedding. It's kind of like a double blow, like, oh, they're also dead too. Oh no.
And I loved how the exposition was folded into a surgery scene. And every time he got a new piece of news about how the old bear had been killed or his brothers had been killed, you sort of almost flinch in pain as a different vein is cut. It was,
I mean,
you could imagine the sort of visceral way that the horrible news was communicated.
but isn't that like there's a time and a place to like debrief John, and maybe it's not while he's getting this operation done?
But do they have
probably
enough
needed the distraction.
time?
let me distract you with awfulness about your family.
Yeah.
Yeah, your childhood home. Yeah, too bad.
Your brothers? Nah, not gonna happen.
You wish this arrow wound was the worst thing about today.
And the best thing of all is he doesn't even know about the Red Wedding yet. He thinks this is as bad as it gets. Anything else on this chapter?
Oh, at some point in the surgery, he says, "I will not scream," and then he immediately screams, and it made me think of Jamie. And I was thinking there's sort of a nice connection between John and Jamie in the sense that they both face this impossible choice between duty and love, but where Jamie chooses love and becomes sort of despised and self-destructive, John chooses duty, but the cost of that is he becomes quite cold and sort of self-loathing. Like, he's not despised, like he's thought of well, but he doesn't really, he's always regretted that decision, or he hates himself for making it, even though he thinks it's still the right decision.
Is he
And he seems
thought
to
of well?
seems
He
to
gets
really
spat.
but he still has his honor. Like, I guess that's the way he thinks of. He's still respected. He's voted Lord Commander, so he obviously
That's fair.
pretty highly thought of at that point. It's only after making all these deals with the wildlings and essentially breaking his oath by marching on Winterfell that they stab him. But yeah, he becomes really seems to distance himself after this, especially from his friends. Yeah.
I agree.
And he senses that Bran is still alive, even though Maester Aemon tells him that he's dead, because he saw that wolf save him.
Yes, at Queen's
And-
Crown. Yes.
Yeah, and he can't
Oh.
prove it, but he just kind of senses it.
Oh, I thought he was alive because, like, when he was warging into Ghost, he saw Bran's face in a werewood.
Oh
No,
no!
that
The
was-
way I read it is it was just because he saw the direwolf.
Because that's the Bran chapter where they're telling all the stories up in the tower.
Right, where John makes the break from the wildlings.
Yeah. It's the tale of the Laughing Knight.
The dream he has with Ygritte kind of reminded me of the dream that Theon has in Winterfell, where he's walking through the castle hall and he's seeing he sees Robb like burst through the door and he's all bloodied, and it just made me think that idea of hurting the ones you love and
Oh, good catch.
that kind of entering your subconscious is, yeah,
Hmm.
Yeah, no,
sort of
you're absolutely
wounding
right.
them emotionally.
Hmm.
Sorry.
That dream is just another fantastic example of George's technical skill in writing horror and imagery of horror, which of course we get in great effect with Red Wedding, but it's all the way through the book. He's a master at it.
Did anybody else find it weird that he admitted to Ygritte? Like, kind of right off the bat with Aemon and
Yeah.
Donloy and
But
everybody?
he's drugged up at that point, isn't he? He's about to go under the knife.
A little bit, but still.
I just think
I
the
feel like-
guilt is overwhelming and he just blurts, he has
Yeah.
to get it out. Because he's a
I-
fundamentally honest person, and there are some people who I think probably can lead very successful double lives. John and indeed Sam are not those people, and I think, he has a really good relationship with Aemon and he just needs to get it out.
And also, he kind of makes the whole Molestown comparison in his defense, and isn't it better just to be like straight up with them, because like later on, like they'll drag in Rattleshirt or whatever, like, a lot of wildlings saw this relationship happen. Like, why would he deny it? And then as part of his honor, like, denying it would be denying Ygritte, who he has feelings for.
He's also been undercover for so long. He's been playing this role for so long. He probably is just wanting to
Jesus
get it all
Christ.
out, get it all on the table.
Yeah, I think it's just
Yeah,
sheer
maybe-
relief, sheer catharsis.
I get this Yeah, I get the sense that he felt himself becoming a wildling or becoming ingratiated into the wildling culture, and he was afraid of that, and he didn't want that to happen to him, to get in too deep, to become too undercover, that you just become the role you're playing. So maybe this was just spilling his guts and unburdening himself, becoming who he was before again.
And also, I just think better to say it than to have it discovered later if you've broken your vow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, Duncan, I think you see it a lot when right before they climb the wall, and like, they're just trying to have like bro talk and everything, and he's like, "Wait a minute, I gotta remember, like, I might have to kill these people. These are not my friends." Like,
Yeah, because I think he does very much like quite a few of the wildlings, but he has to remember that no, they aren't my brothers. I'm not here to be their friends. I'm here to stop them, and if that means killing them. And I think he does have a very hard time with that. Do you think also he tells Maester Aemond and Donal about Ygritte? I know to me it came off more as just it bursting out of him than him telling them per se. But I almost wonder whether it's a bit of this is what happened, so please accept me for it. And I know it happened and I know it was the wrong thing to do. So whether it's sort of like a confessional for him in doing it.
I feel it's more spontaneous than sort of calculated. It's an emotional outpouring. He's just emotional to be back.
The only other note I had was that the world feels very post-apocalyptic as he's riding through the snow. When he arrives there's no one there to greet him, no sentries, no lights on, and the castles are described as huddled against the cliff like broken toys, which I thought was really evocative. And it reminded me of another dream he had where he's running through Winterfell when it's empty and no one's home, and just conveyed these feelings of abandonment, which I thought worked quite well.
Okay, well, with that, let's move on to December 18th, the day later. We go to Jon 7. We also know that this is the day that Nymeria fishes Cat out of the Trident. We jump forward 70 pages in my edition and 7 chapters in the published order, and it's Duncan with apparently an unconventional chapter reread.
Okay, this is a bit silly, but for my recap, I've endeavored to match Tanya's irrational hatred for Jon Snow with my irrational praise.
Oh,
So,
good. Fantastic.
oh
Yeah.
boy.
All right. Here we go.
Hilarious.
It's a bit long, but we'll see. Here we go. All right. Jon Snow, praise his name, stands guard on the parapets of the King's Tower. He watches as Molestown burns in the distance, its flames dancing gracefully against the autumn sky. Jon might have liked to dance too, but his legs still hurt on account of the arrow he'd gotten through it. And also dancing was for sweet summer children, and he was a man of the Night's Watch. But still, it's nice to have the option. He and Donal Noy have done their best to fortify Castle Black against the impending wildling raiders. But Jon knew it would probably be up to him to save the day at the last second. A cold wind rises, tossing Jon's curly brown locks just right. "It's pretty cold," remarks a nearby trainee named Saturn. "No, it's not," replies Jon in a clipped accent that barely conceals his genetic greatness. Saturn nods reverently. They shared the parapets with 6 scarecrows dressed as black brothers to make their numbers seem greater. Jon thought of a pretty funny joke about crows fighting alongside scarecrows, but he didn't want to mess up his carefully constructed stoicism. Down below, Pip and Gren were helping evacuate the last of the Molestown residents. To Jon's disappointment, they weren't actual moles, but just a bunch of villagers. He found himself wondering if there even were any actual moles, or whether the town's name was purely symbolic. He pondered whether there was any advantage to warging into a mole instead of a direwolf. What did they even call a mole warg? A morgue? That didn't seem right. Jon then remembered that Ygritte was part of the approaching raiding party, and his mole-based puzzlement was replaced by concern. "Please don't come to the battle," he longed to tell her. "Take refuge with the moles, and I will find you afterwards." That night, when the wildlings finally arrive at their gates, Jon is actually half relieved. It was exhausting striking the same heroic pose for hours on end, and his crutch was starting to buckle under the weight of his melancholy. He starts by no-scoping a few of the raiders, and then spies Big Boyle trying to hack down the door to Harden's tower. He is about to call out to the man, but then remembered that he'd actually betrayed the party like 2 days ago. He looses an arrow at him instead, but misses. "Damn lag," he mutters under his breath, just loud enough so that Saturn knew he didn't miss through lack of skill. A throng of thunderous thens starts thrashing down the gates, and it's on for young and old and infirmed. Raiders scramble over the parapets, but Jon gives them the Longclaw special and garnishes the rest with a vat of burning oil. The thens break through the gates and charge up the stairs, but then the Night's Watch springs its trap. They start launching fire arrows at the oil-soaked stairs, and suddenly the wood blooms like a winter rose on a wall of ice in some faraway acid trip. John pauses at the complex specificity of the metaphor, but then realizes the battle is over. Sifting through the carnage by the gates, he finds Big Boyle lying dead beside an axe. John leans down and gently closes the man's hideous eyeballs. Farewell, sweet prince. Heaven needed another angel. Ygritte stirs impatiently nearby. Oi, bastard, I'm over here. John turns, startled. Sorry, babe, I was just getting to you. Do you remember that cave? She whispers, snowflakes melting in her fiery hair. We should have stayed in that cave. Oh, don't worry, John exclaims excitedly. We'll go back there. I've been working on some killer new moves for next time. How do you feel about moles? No, you idiot, I'm dying. I'm just expressing regret over how our mutual affection has been poisoned by systemic conflict. Oh, John realizes what she meant too late. He feels sad, but not the angsty teen sadness he wears like a pair of comfy gym shorts, but a new prickly sadness that just doesn't fit right. Scene.
Aww.
Oh my god, that was hilarious.
That is so good.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how drunk were you when you wrote that?
How drunk
I
is
was
he
not
now?
drunk at all. That took ages to write. No one laughed though.
I was muting
I was
myself because I was
muted.
laughing too much.
We were being respectful.
It's like, oh no, this is a terrible mistake.
That was fantastic. I don't even know where we begin on the discussion of that. Do we want to maybe do sort of battle related stuff first and then get into the emotional stuff of the death of Ygritte? Does that make sense?
I'd like to just think about how mad Tanya will be when she listens to that.
I do have a prior question, which is, Duncan, you said this is your favourite John chapter in Storm, so I just wanted to get into why.
I said it was one of my favorite chapters, but like the last reread I was on was Old Stones, and I said that was also one of my favorite chapters. So pretty much a third of A Storm are some of my favorite chapters. But yeah, this one and the one where he's defending the wall and the one where he meets with Mance Rayder and Stannis charges in. It's all part of one awesome sequence for John, in my opinion. But yeah, I just thought that the ending was. I thought the battle itself was great. I think this is the first battle since Blackwater, if that's right, that we see, and I thought it was just really exciting in the way it was described. The waiting for the battle was really tense. Just the characters oiling their crossbows so it turns smoothly, fussing with the clothes of the strawman was really good. And then the battle itself was I thought it was really well written, but it was also sort of incoherent at times, which I think is how a battle kind of should be when you're in the mix of it. John can only really focus on one part of it at a time. So when his back is turned and then he turns back, something has changed. So then the battlefield is constantly changing him around him, and he's just sort of struggling to keep up with it. But he has good instincts and he fights well, which is exciting. And yeah, the ending I thought was very moving, where she says we should have stayed in that cave. And yeah, just overall, thought it was a really powerful chapter.
Aww.
Do you think she'd really say that, though? I felt like that was a little out of character.
Well, a little bit too TV soapy, heroine died
Right.
in Lover's
Like-
Arms.
I think it makes sense because she's probably been thinking about him as much as he's been thinking about her. And he does think about her a lot in these two chapters. And I think it's probably one of the more healthy and sweeter relationships in the series. It seems to be based on genuine affection. It's definitely more consensual than most of the other pairings, apart from maybe Ned and Kat. Like the other relationships seem to be more about how the guy can serve the fantasies of the male character, like Tyrion and Shay and the Hound and Sansa, even like Ares Oakheart. But when John thinks about her, he remembers just like hanging out with her, how her goofy smile, how warm she was, how tough she is. They genuinely just seem to enjoy hanging out with each other. And I think the cave is sort of important for two reasons, because it was just this experience that they both shared.
The
And it
Lord's
was this
kiss.
moment. Yeah, that as well. Just even that I thought was really, really sweet, because John's inexperienced, and when she asks, why did you do that? And he's like, I don't know, you just seem to like it. Like there's this sweet idea of just wanting to give each other pleasure and be affectionate. There's no sense of trying to possess, fulfill some seated fantasy and psychological absence. And yeah, the other thing is it's this moment where they both kind of escape the confines and the expectations of their respective cultures. So I think they both seem to regret not staying in that cave. Like they could have been happy if they just stayed in this cave and averted this inevitable battle that was always going to happen. One of them was always going to die, but ultimately it just seems to have been a mirage. They couldn't have stayed in that cave because you can never really escape those things, as most of the characters in the series find out.
Yeah, I think that the John and Ygritte's relationship is my favorite in the books, and I think a lot of it has to do with like, they do have that one very intimate sex scene in the cave, and the couple of things throughout John's chapters, but at the same time, like, you look at other people's relationships and they're mostly focusing on the other's bodies, and whereas John thinks about her personality and how she's funny and how she cared about him and how he cared about her. It's very romantic, and it's very, as a lady, I like it.
And as well, he thinks about how she's a good fighter, I'm pretty sure he says in this chapter. So he's accepting all parts of her, not just some parts of her. It's all of her, which is fantastic to see, especially in the society he's been raised in compared to her society.
Well, doesn't he say something like that too? It's like, Ygritte, well, she could kill you or kiss you, and they're like, either way.
Sad face. Oh, George
Kiss
did a
by
good
fire.
job with them. Like,
Yeah, but I was
And
happy
as
to see that
well-
relationship end. I know that sounds harsh.
yeah.
I'd had enough of John being like, "Oh, I'm having sex. Oh, I feel bad about it." I was like, "Okay,"
What?
but because I don't think, I think it wasn't true love. I think it was first love, baby love, infatuation, getting your rocks off, and I was ready for John to have gone through his conflicted ethics and for her to die. And I think it's amazing how little, well, we'll see that in forthcoming chapters, how little affected he is by it ultimately. The one big
Really?
takeaway for me on this reread was actually Donal Noy. I had totally forgotten how much respect I should have this man, that he really does try and organise the defences. He has a good strategic plan. I mean, John even compares him to Ned with his strong, commanding voice. And I thought, wow, this is a really great guy. Another example of a good man trying his best against the odds. And yeah, I really got reminded of how great Donal Noy is. Props to him.
It really did remind me, and I was just like, Donal Noy, you're a badass. Like,
Well-
he's a one-armed blacksmith. Like, John came in the last chapter, and he's like, I got you, bud. Like, lean on my only arm.
Yeah.
That-
Yeah, and they have like that, like after the Battle of the Wall, they John and Tormund have this nice little bro moment where it's just like, wait a minute, the King of the Giants was brought down by a one-armed blacksmith. Har. Just like, I want to hear that song too. I think he said that Mance Rayder would make a song out of it.
My only other note was a couple of times in this chapter, John refers to the battle as the dance. The dance has moved on to another part of sort of the battlements or whatever. Is this the first time we hear within, like, apart from a Dance with Dragons, obviously, but the concept of war as a dance? Or is that repeated as a metaphor many times?
Jamie brings it up when he fights Brienne.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
Yep, you're right.
And he also brings...
Siri-
No.
Syria
You go.
Farrell refers to the Knight's Dance.
Instead of the water dance.
And I mean the Dance of the Dragons, obviously.
Yeah.
Historical precedent.
But
That was all I had on the chapter. Other stuff from everyone else?
Any thoughts on the significance of the you-know-nothing Jon Snow? Is there an agreement on what that is referring to? Is it just... I just assumed it was kind of, you think you know how the world is, but you can only see one point of it, one point of view at a time. There's actually all these other points of view. So Jon sees the world as this northerner or as this Night's Watchman, but actually being among the wildlings and seeing how they live gives him this different perspective, which I think he takes into book 5 as he tries to strive towards sort of this, not reconciliation, but this kind of uneasy truce between the wildlings and the Night's Watchmen. Fortunately, he can't communicate that point of view as well to the rest of the Night's Watch.
I don't know if something will happen after book 5 with John's death, like if he's resurrected, like maybe he'll know something more. But it's trying to remind us of how naive he is about the world around him, and that constant reminder that like John is doing all this stuff, but he doesn't really know much stuff. And I think that it's a reminder that he is naive and that he is unknowing of what's about to happen to him and the world, and maybe even with him and Ygritte. That was my feeling of it. And I think that after this book, he does grow a little bit more, especially when he, as you said, Duncan, like becomes the Night Watch commander and whatnot. But because I think that with other characters, like Sansa in particular, like it's very obvious how naive she is. Whereas John, I think he might be just as naive, but on a not as obvious level, where we have to have it reminded to us constantly from Ygritte that he just doesn't know anything.
Yeah, and it starts off as sort of friendly teasing, but the final being her final line is quite poignant. And I think, yeah, definitely all the Stark children start at this point of naivety and are slowly learning more and more about the world that could go, good doesn't always prevail. The songs aren't always true. Sometimes the knights are monsters, that kind of thing. He does seem to take that to heart. I disagree with the idea that Ygritte's death doesn't hit him really hard. I think even the betrayal itself, the way his mindset throughout the battle feels incredibly numb. Like he doesn't feel the pain in his leg. He doesn't feel the fear of the enemy. He's just numbed by his decision. He's just doing what he has to do because this is the choice he's made. Like when I first read it, I thought he cried as he was standing over Ygritte's body, but he doesn't actually cry. And I think that numbness or that coldness escalates in book 5 as he becomes more and more detached. But he continues to think about Ygritte, and he actually talks to her at a few points. He says when he's talking about the council or the lords of the Night's Watch, is there a term for them? Like his inner circle?
Oh,
anyway,
good question.
when he's referring to
the
like
sort of small council of the Night's Watch.
Yeah, when he's referring to like Bowen Marsh, he says, they know nothing, Ygritte, and what's more, they will not learn. So I think at least Jon, for all his faults, he's trying to learn. He's trying to take on other people's points of view, walk in other people's footsteps. It can't just be us against them because there's a far more sinister them out there that they all need to fear and work together against.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that the point that you just brought up is exactly what he learns, and what everyone needs to learn is that there's this great threat out there that vows and duties to the Night's Watch really mean nothing in comparison to the real battle ahead.
I think on a meta level, from the reader's point of view, we also have to remember that a lot of these characters don't have our omniscient perspective. They can only see what's in front of them. They can only know about the world as it's been taught to them. But even us as readers, we don't necessarily know everything about these characters. We might have a particular opinion of a character like Jaime, but once he tells us about what the Mad King did to him, we gain a deeper insight into their decisions. So we as readers even have to admit we don't know as much as we think we do. We need to be open.
On the feminist side of this chapter for me, like as I was reading it, I felt like the chapter that we read previously where Jon is having like his fever dreams and whatnot, I actually felt like all of that made sense to me. I was like, oh, Jon's just being a normal person right now. And then in this one, I felt like in the beginning especially, I was like, oh, Jon's just trying to be the hero. Like it's written in such a way that he's like, oh, I my legs fucked up. You know what? I'm going to still fight because I'm going to will myself to fight. And it just felt very like hero-esque in that sense.
He's an adrenaline junkie.
No, that's
massive
literally
adrenaline
junkie.
I don't think he's an adrenaline junkie. But...
it's extreme sports, snowboarding,
extreme fighting to your death.
It's all hands on deck. If they lose this battle, everyone dies.
Yeah.
There's a guy with one arm fighting. Come on.
Yeah, no way would he sit in his bed. I don't get that. That's not her heroism. That's just survival.
Plus, at least if he's up there with the bow, even if he doesn't shoot anyone, he at least might scare some people off with his drugged up waving bows around.
And throw scarecrows.
Apparently, he's not that drugged up.
Yeah, they just feed him bath salts or something like that. He starts eating people's faces. It's gonna be cool.
Yeah.
There's lots of.
Or if you start eating people's faces, just send him down and be like, "Eat the enemy, go get them."
There was lots of ice and fire imagery. He describes the fires glistening against the wall, and the snowflakes melting in Ygritte's fiery hair. Thought that was nice.
Yeah,
vivid colors.
To kind of wrap up the whole all hands on deck. I was thinking how smart of it was to burn up the stairway so your only access to the top of the wall is the elevator. But again, it's this is if they don't take care of this threat, everything's done. So that's a sacrifice that they're willing to make.
Yeah.
Right?
And
There's no way of egress. It's very unsafe. If the elevator were to fail, there's no way to escape the top of the wall. Safety first.
I guess they'd have to go to the next castle over and climb down.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the entire stairs though. It's just one part of it.
Yeah, but it's a good part. It's how you start to get upstairs.
Yeah, they can always rebuild it. Whereas if they lose everything and they let the wildlings through, as far as they're concerned, they're all dead and there's no one to hold the wall, and the world of men is their realms. like overrun. So yeah.
I thought it was interesting, the contrast between, I'm forgetting his name now, the boy that follows John around for most of the
Satin?
Yeah, Satin.
The horse
yeah.
guy.
Yeah, I felt like the contrast between the two of them was interesting, seeing how like John has grown from presumably that small boy is now, and how he's learning everything the hard way.
With them, sorry, do you have more to say, Casey? Sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay. With them, would you say John is unblooded still? Because I don't think he's fought in an actual battle. Yes, he's had some fights against real life people, but I don't think he's ever fought in an actual battle, and it's his first one. And then he keeps thinking about Saturn being like, oh, this green boy, this unblooded kid. And I'm like, he's older than you. They say he's 18 and John's probably 15 still at this point.
Oh yeah, that's right.
John,
bro, you're still a child. You are way younger. Like
I forget how
John
young John is actually.
Yeah, very young.
Yeah.
But John was brought up in a castle in a very like martial kind of atmosphere, and like yes, he's killed people, and yes, he hasn't been in any battles, but like he's got more fighting experience than this 18-year-old guy that grew up in a gay. What was it, brothel that serviced men though? Wasn't he servicing men?
Well, no, wasn't he just a son of one of the whores? But I don't think they say.
No, he is. He worked in brothels.
Okay.
Yeah, because the like some of the other captive, I don't know what they're called. The other people, upper echelon of the Night's Watch, take issue with it. And,
because
John defends him.
Yeah, because he makes him the assistant, and he's like, John, why would you make this male that worked in a brothel like your assistant? Like, what does that say about you?
Well, they think it's dishonorable to take orders from a male whore, but like, and
Right.
John's like, well, you take orders from way worse than him.
Yeah, that's
But
right. He's like that.
obviously-
You know that guy with all like the roses or whatever tattooed on him. Ugh.
Plus, as well, they're the ones who go to the brothel, and they're the reason why a brothel's there. So shut up. Supply and demand, people.
Yeah, I mean, hypocrisy is rank in the Night's Watch. They,
Yeah.
they're gonna burn him for going with a grit, but half the watch has visited Molestown.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's not technically bad because he says he'll father any children, and John didn't father any children. He just had sex.
Well, that was the thing I was thinking. The amount of times they had sex, Ygritte was probably pregnant by that point, if she could get pregnant. So it
Do you
makes
think
her
that's what her-
Killed her off. Like,
even worse. Yeah.
Do you think that's what her last nothing meant?
Oh God. That's
No,
great.
I think that it was. I think it's just that she was dying. I don't think she was ever pregnant, but because I
don't think
don't
she
know
would've
if the
known at that
timeline works out with knowing or not. I don't know.
It probably wouldn't have been that long, just a few weeks.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have known yet.
poor baby.
The only other note I had was we hear about how the southern side of the castles is undefended, just in case any of the Night's Watch try and get involved in the affairs of the realm. And we hear some cool stories about how the Night's King and the commander of the Night's Fort and the Snow Castle, or was it Snow Tower, went to war against each other. But I also think it sort of foreshadows John's own getting mixed up in the affairs of the realm when he marches on Winterfell, or makes the decision to march on Winterfell. So he's sort of realizing what will be his own doom at this moment.
Yeah, good point. The whole position of the Night's Watch is hopeless, isn't it? Undefended from the south, incredibly long defensive wall, undermanned, manned
I
by
kind of wanted.
lords who fight with each other because of their Westerosi loyalties, and common soldiers who have no ethics, rapers and pillagers, and it's so hopeless.
Yeah.
Well, and yet it seems to work, even in its vastly diminished state. It still seemed to work, at least under the old bear.
Because
heart
the
of
wall
the tower.
defends itself, my dear.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's
But
still
it's-
kind of like a stigma, right? Like, or there's still like kind of an inherent nobility about it, or like it's like guest right. It's like no one wants to really break it because it's this ancient kind of custom. So it's like if you get the choice to being sent to the wall or getting your hand chopped, whatever, like however you got there, like you go there with the knowledge that you have to kind of serve honorably, and then the mutiny obviously was not ideal for that.
I wanted to touch on how they send ravens to all 4 of the kings, and they say it feels like they try to stay neutral, but I almost wonder if they picked a king, they would actually get more people, which ends up happening kind of with Stannis in the end, but that's only because Stannis himself intervenes just because that's what his best bet is. And that's, I think, what Melisandre tells him to do. But the strategy of telling all 4 kings that they need people, how do we feel about that? Because I think that maybe if they only sent it to 1 or 2, they might have, or lied and said that they were the rightful king, that they would actually get people.
But they have no other choice.
Do they say?
It's so plumbed into their DNA to be neutral. The entire design of the wall is open to the south. I mean, surely this is the only thing they can do, is to send it to all the kings.
Which kings do you actually think they send it to? Because they send it to 4 kings, but you have 5 that they still think Renly's alive and Rob's alive, but they probably still think Rob's alive at that point.
I think they think Renly's dead because that happened fairly early on, and that's why I thought it was only to 4.
Yeah, the news that Renly's dead has come to the wall. I think we've done that in a previous chapter, and we
Yeah.
commented on how long it took to get there. But obviously they'll still think Rob is alive. So it's Rob, Joffrey,
Stannis and Balon.
Stannis and
Yeah.
Balon.
You
Yeah.
really think they sent it to Balon?
Yeah,
Yeah.
why not?
Well, Cotter Pike's
He's
the one at
closest.
Eastwatch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And he
but-
can probably get there the fastest out of everyone.
Apart from the
But
Northern
East- I guess-
Lords, he's the closest.
Eastwatch is on the east, and the Iron Islands are in the west.
Well, I guess
correct.
technically Balon has declared himself king of the north, so maybe if they send it to him, it'll because he has Deepwood Mort, so they could send men up there, or the Stony Shore, if he were so inclined, which obviously he isn't because he's garbage.
How do you really feel?
Do we want to talk about the people who died in the first one and the connotations it might have with the death of people, which is what Matt had me do homework on before?
Yeah. What happened to him?
Okay, so Jaffa and Otha, they were turned into whites and brought back to the wall. Ghost found them and dragged them back. And Otha is the one that Jon fights off when Otha tries to kill Lord Commander Mormont. So Otha dies by fire. It's not instantaneously though, because originally the fire is more towards his chest, and then it spreads up and then he dies. And then Jaffa is cut to pieces by 12 swords. And in the book it specifically states that he dies after he is beheaded, and that was the killing blow. But he was beheaded, and one of his arms still managed to kill the guy who beheaded him.
Oh, okay. Yep, that makes sense because they had that hand descend down to King's Landing.
So we have Dragonglass and Valyrian Steel that can kill an other.
Supposedly,
And then-
it hasn't been explicitly stated.
Right. And then fire and apparent dismemberment,
I'd say
decapitation.
it's
will
almost
kill a white.
decapitation. I almost think it's that you have to decapitate them and get their head off and stop their eyes from glowing, and then that will stop the magic from enabling them to be controlled.
So that's kind of like a Walking Dead kill scenario kind of thing, like attack the head,
Classic zombie, yes.
classic zombie.
And that might be why the ravens attacked their eyes. They're trying to.
Yeah, because the ravens always attack their faces, it seems to be as well.
That's where the magical thread is, or something that the White Walkers pull on.
Do you think it's like they see through the white's eyes and that's why they're the glowing blue? Or
Well, I mean, there's definitely I don't know if that's why, but the blue definitely indicates some kind of magic's happening.
yeah, because Cold Hands doesn't have blue eyes, does he? He's just a frozen body. And he's in control of himself, and then all of the whites have the blue eyes.
Thank you for doing research.
A+.
I feel like a really bad fan of these books because I find these sorts of discussions quite uninteresting. And that's no disrespect to the discussion that we just had. But the kind of the sort of the technicalities and the sort of the mechanics of the world building on the sort of spooky supernatural stuff. To me, the fun is all the sort of psychology around characters as they develop and age and get wiser or less wise. The sort of how is Jon going to react to Ygritte's death? How guilty is he going to feel? What ramifications is that going to have? Things like Stannis coming to the wall and how that totally turns your impression of him. I'm such a bad reader of fantasy.
How do you kill zombies, Bina?
I don't care. You probably just
No, but-
get your dad to pay someone to do it. I don't know.
But Vina as well, didn't you start reading these books a while ago when it was more politically driven than fantasy as well? Or you thought you were getting more into a gritty political drama than a fantasy series?
Well, I think when you first read Game of Thrones, you have to remember that all the dragons and the magics and the sort of leeches and the blood magic and all that, he drips it in incredibly slowly. So you could read it almost as a sort of historical fiction or an alt history fiction, which is sort of how I got into it. Now, that's not to say that I don't like fantasy, because I love Tolkien, but I think he writes such beautifully rich and transforming characters. To me, that will always be his strength as a horror writer. His strength as a world builder and a supernatural world builder, to me, is way below that of Tolkien, and I think it's almost like he's too good. He goes off on too many digressions and too many and that's why he's in a mess right now. But he's unlike Tolkien, or better than Tolkien, if I may dare to say so. He's a wonderful writer of evolving, nuanced character, so that's why I love him.
Yeah,
So
I agree. I think obviously the characters are the reason you read the series. They're so engaging. The magic, I think, works best when it's not really explained, when it's just left in the shadows as this arcane, mysterious, unknowable threat. So yeah, getting into the mechanics and the nitty gritty does kind of take some of the shine off it, or some of the horror or the weirdness
Take
out
some
of
of
it.
the magic.
you see,
Yeah.
Some of the
like,
magic. Yeah.
Ironically, yes.
you see, like I for this, I would tend to agree with you, Duncan. But for this, it's important for the rest of the story, because if they're starting to they want to mine dragon glass, they're making preparations to fight these whites. They need to know how to kill them. I don't care like how dragons breathe fire. Like I'm cool with that just being magical, like not like But like I think this is like really important to the upcoming stories, especially what alliances, because Stannis says like he has a ton of dragon glass on Dragonstone and that they can mine that. So at this point he's a good ally to have for the Wall to have, because, well, besides fighting the Boltons as well, but because they can get what they need to kill this army of the undead from him. Like if Cersei and the Lannisters can only provide men, that's good. But like, I think it is a little more practical than just talking about.
Yeah, but I think you can do it at a very I choose to do it, and maybe this is again, I'm self-aware about this. You can do it at a very simplistic level. This is a Song of Ice and Fire. You have two wild beasties. One is killed by dragonglass, which is basically ice. The other one's killed by fire. Therefore, you're going to need Stannis and his dragonglass and probably some fire-breathing dragons. Job done. And that's ultimately, I guess, the sort of everyone gets through their civil war and then turns on the threat from beyond the wall, and that's how it's going to play out. But I don't really feel I need to get more into it.
I hope so.
Yeah, that would be awesome, right? Let's do that. Let's make that happen. What I do love about these books is they are so rich and can be read on so many different levels and ways, that there are fans, and maybe Matt, you're more in that category, that can really get into the technicalities of it and the worlds of Ice and Fire and the world building, and maybe don't care as much about the stuff that I care about. And these books are large and contain multitudes, and everyone can find their point of entry, which is fantastic.
It is. And as well, if you don't particularly enjoy that sort of read yourself, like you don't necessarily have, like I'm sure, Bina, you don't necessarily go out there and look for like you don't go online and Google Jacob Preston, please don't hate me for saying it, but you won't go and like search up ridiculous fan theories. You're more like, this is the story, I'm going to go and talk about the characters now. Fan theories about random stuff somewhere else, please.
Yeah, so the stuff I'll search out is more like essays on allegories to sort of British history, or the politics of Westeros, or some of the more kind of literary stuff that Valkyrie writes, for instance. But I do love, I know that he gets a bit of crap for the tin foil stuff, but I do quite like the idea that there are these people who will clamber over it and do all this wonderful detective work, so that the kind of the dilettantes like me can come along and just Google, like I did for this, Coldham theories, and it just comes up in a Reddit or a Westeros.org answer. So thank God those people are out there for the lazy people like me. So it's beautiful. This fandom is just wonderful and diverse as well.
Yeah, I love the last time I was on a reread, we did the Old Stones, and Duncan was very passionate about it and wrote this beautiful essay for Tower of the Hand, and then he comes back with his recap today.
I like to spice it up.
Change it up. You never know what you're gonna get.
Can't pin me down.
I thought it was brilliant.
Thank you.
Well, on that happy note, let's close out the episode. I would like to suggest that if you want to follow us and find out what we're all up to and which podcast episodes are out, you can search for Vassals of Kingsgrave on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. If you want to get involved, however, and chat to the other people who listen and participate, search for a podcast of Ice and Fire and you will find our forums. For those of you who are still somehow listening along at home on this long journey, the next episode 52, will be hosted by Nadia. It's going to cover the dates 20th of December to the 1st of January 300, so we're making it to a new year. And it's going to be the chapters Tyrion 6, Davos 5, and Tyrion 7, which is the news of the Red Wedding reaching King's Landing, Davos getting the letter saying that the wall's under attack, and the morning of the Purple Wedding. So, this back end of Storm of Swords, big, shocking, narrative-changing events are coming thick and fast. It remains for me to say thank you. My name's Bina007. I've been joined by Duncan, Sarah, Matt, and Casey. So thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bina.
Thank you.
And just
Thank you.
no worries. And just to check if any of you have any forthcoming episodes of VOC that you'd like to sort of advertise, see if anyone wants to join, raise the banner for.
I'm hosting episode 53, which will be my first time hosting a linear reread. So
Good for you. You've got a big one. Have you got the Purple
Hooray.
Wedding?
yes, I have the Purple Wedding.
Oh, that's so cool.
I knew I was like, if I get a chance to be on the Purple Wedding, I'll be stoked, but I didn't think that was going to happen. And then it's like, no, you can host the Purple Wedding. And I was like, what?
Duncan, or are you having a nice one break after Krakencast? Kudos to which, because it's the only one of the casts that's actually finished the series. So suck it, Dragoncast and Wolfcast.
Wolfcast.
Where are you
Lagging
guys?
behind.
I know.
We recorded.
No, but it's not out. Didn't happen.
You're gonna
Doesn't
have
exist
to-
until it's on the page.
I have a very good theory on that one that I'm not going to mention because Bina, but it's very good.
I'm probably going to have a bit of a break, but I think we are doing a Krakencast Halloween episode as a supplement to the main Halloween podcast, which is weird because we don't actually have Halloween in Australia, so we're just going to talk
Really?
about what Halloween looks like to us.
Matt, you said really on the forums too. You've
Yeah.
been through this.
You asked me if I didn't like fun, or we didn't
Why
like
don't
fun.
you? Come on.
Okay, well, with that, that's been fantastic, really fun talking to you guys, and I look forward to hearing to the next few episodes. We've got some good ones coming up. I can't wait to listen. So have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye, Bina.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.